Have an issue with sound?
If you turn it, if you have, unless you have the sound deadened, yeah. Ah, we are now streaming
We're
live.
we're live.
I did it again. I'm proud of myself. Welcome, everybody out there. We have a really interesting discussion today on the subject of genre bending. We're going to clarify some things and get some definitions, tell some funny or horrifying stories, depending on how you feel about genre bending. And I would like to introduce my two guests, Mike Krentz, wave Mike, and Rob Samborn. Both of these authors have been doing genre bending thrillers. And that's why they're going to lead off the conversation for us today. But first, I have to tell you my ultimate story of not just genre bending, but genre breaking. Okay. A few years ago, I was on a panel with some other authors. One of those authors was very upset because his first book had come in and the reviews were just savage. And he just couldn't understand the problem. He had written a literary mystery, and that is a subgenre. Everybody kind of recognizes a literary mystery when they see it. He had borrowed the conventions of the mystery to tell or to show his psychological examination of his characters, but he did not solve the crime. There was a murder mystery and the murder never got solved. And he couldn't figure out why everybody was so upset. And the problem was that book could have gone to the literary market. It could have gone to the mystery market. The publisher sent it to the mystery market. It totally violated the conventions of that market because it did not solve the crime. They'll put it with a
Hmm.
lie, but it didn't solve the crime. So that's an example of bending a genre to the point where you've actually broken it. And we've got other horrible stories to tell you too. But first of all, I thought I'd ask our guests for their definition, because one of the things I discovered when I posted about this is that some of you have a very specific idea of what genre bending is. And I'm here to tell you that's not what the authors think. So for what it's worth, Mike Krentz, how would you define genre bending?
Well, I have a slightly different term for it. I call it genre blending. Uh, it's the same thing. It's basically where you take elements of different genres other than literary fiction and write to the conventions of those genres. So you might have, well, the one that is most talked about nowadays is romantasy, romance and fantasy kind of blended together. The challenge being, how do you define the audience that is going to resonate or identify with this blended or bent genre? My contribution to that process has been my I'm yeah, it's a challenge because I don't really even know what to finally call it, but it's military fiction written from the point of view of women who are in strong, who are in high performing leadership positions. So, is it women's fiction? Is it military fiction? Is it war fiction? Is it family life fiction? Is it, and I still haven't totally figured that out. Uh, and that has implications as far as what you put on your Amazon page in terms of blurbs and also cover design. And you can't see the top of my two posters in the back, but these first two had the word her in it to emphasize that the main characters were women. Her show of force and her Pacific Showdown. And I got a lot of flack over that, uh, especially from some women who felt that you wouldn't put his show of force, so why are you doing her show of force? So that's an example of a well-intended blended kind of thing that didn't work out. So you'll see my new one that's coming out next week. There's no her in it. So we'll see how that works. And I'm going to let turn over to Rob because Rob I know has had some similar experiences in his by the way very excellent series. I've read all three of the books and enjoyed them immensely, and looking forward to whatever he has coming next.
Tell us
Well,
about
thank
the
you, Mike.
series. Tell us about the series so that we know where you're coming from.
Yeah, thank you, Jayne, for having me on your show.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yes. So first of all, I would define it in the way that Mike defined it, where you are taking multiple genres and blending them together in whatever format that might be to either to create a whole new genre or to just have those elements in one particular genre. Now, ironically, I guess, maybe ironically or not, it feels like everything I read or watch is cross genre, right? Nearly everything, not everything. I would say really where we aren't seeing cross genre material or blended or bent genre material is when the material really sticks to the tropes, the tried and true classic tropes of that specific genre. Let's say like a mystery, if it's like an Agatha Christie type of whodunit, right? Where you're really sticking to those kind of beats where you have murder and then you have the suspects and then you have the detective and then he solves the crime at the end, right? And you have to have the crime solved at the end. Now, what happens when you put that in space, right? Then you have kind of, which actually is not a bad idea, maybe, but you have then that blending of science fiction and mystery, and then it's to Mike's point, it goes, like it's like, how do you market that? Do you market that, and like to your point, Jayne, as well, like, do you market that to the mystery crowd or do you market that to the science fiction crowd? So what I write, so this is my first book, The Prisoner of Paradise. And I write what you could say at the heart of it is commercial fiction or speculative fiction that blends thriller, international thriller, historical fiction, a little bit of magical realism, and at its crux, even you can say, is a love story. So it really does, there's some action in it, there's some adventure in it, there's something for everybody, right? It's like there's two different sides of the coin as to whether blending genres is good. It's like on one hand, there's something for everybody. On the other hand, maybe it doesn't really focus on specific target markets. So at the end of the day, now I market it as historical thriller, right? So it's a thriller, and historical thriller really could be one of two different things. One is a thriller that's set in the past, or two is a thriller that involves history in some way. So the Da Vinci Code is a classic example of an historical thriller, but as far as I remember, there are actually no scenes set in the past. My books, about 25 or 30% of them are actually set in the past. So in terms of what's happened with my books, so now they're all out and they've done fairly well. But when my agents were actually out on submission and sending them out to publishers, we kept hearing the exact same response. We love it, but it's cross genre. We don't know how to market this. At the time, to be honest with you, I really thought that was BS because, like I said, like everything I read and write is cross genre in some way. But with books, it does turn out that it extends from bookstores and libraries because the booksellers and the librarians need a place, need a shelf to put the books, right? So if it is historical thriller, historical fiction with thriller, what shelf do you put that on? So, nowadays on online platforms, it doesn't matter quite as much. That is still a little bit of an issue, but not quite as much.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what happened with mine. I ended up getting a publisher and we did then market it as historical thrillers. I'm now with a new publisher and we're still marketing it as historical thrillers. And it turned out that's the way to go. But yeah, it was a very, very big challenge in terms of getting the publishers in the beginning and also figuring out really how to market the books.
Yeah, I hear you. I've told my first career suicide story was when years ago when I wrote my first science fiction romances, and people stood in line around the block not to buy those books. the science fiction crowd didn't want all the mushy romance in there, and the romance crowd didn't want all the strange science fiction in there. And I managed to violate the conventions of both genres. The weird part is a decade later, there's a market, but it took a decade. And that's my advice to people who are thinking about doing this and thinking they're doing something radically new and different and fresh. You might want to think twice, because it's not that great to be at the front of the curve, my experience.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, the other thing I would add, though, is that at their margins, all genres are very fluid and they're constantly changing. I've seen horror elements now creeping into the mystery market, and the psychological suspense market, which was huge. That was the Gone Girl type story. That's still huge, but it has also generated a whole new interest in the Gothic. The Gothic has been resurrected by the invention of the psychological suspense market. So that fluidity is great, and that part works, I think. But yeah, it's tricky to market, and that's your basic problem. Because even on Amazon, you have to market. You have to figure out where the metadata and all that.
Yeah.
You decide how to file it.
Yeah, that's the point I was going to bring up. It does, as Rob said, kind of stem from bookstores not knowing what shelf to put it on, but it's also if you become familiar with the algorithms that vendors like Amazon use, they tend to try to target an audience that's looking for a certain type of book, type parentheses genre, and it's difficult to target those audiences if you're writing a blended thing. The other thing that Rob brought up, which I think is really critical, is even if you blend the genres, there are certain tropes or genre conventions that absolutely must be followed. And an example is when I first went to publish the military fiction series, the question was, do you want to put it in the military romance category? And I said, no can do, because no happy ending. And anybody who's looking for romance they're not going to like it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you got to be careful about meeting those expectations of those readers who are the target audience, that many of them like to read a certain type of book.
Yes, and that's, like Rob pointed out, that's how bookstores and libraries and even Amazon is divided up. And people read for genre. They also read for setting. The landscape, fictional landscape is important. So when you're switching fictional landscapes, well, Rob, you actually you found a cool way to do that, because you used one ancient city. So that the landscape didn't change that much between the past and the present. That actually was very effective. I love the way that worked in your Prisoner of Paradise series.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
that particular city that's Venice, by the way, for the audience, Venice, Italy. And the city hasn't changed really that much in a few hundred years.
Which was
So.
that was a cool way to handle it. What do you think, if you're telling people who are out there trying to do this, have you got any tips on how to approach it that will keep them in some kind of safe zone, or at least make the book viable for sales? Anything you want to pass on? And Rob?
I think the key is to figure out what is the primary genre.
Okay.
And focus and target that audience and the marketing for that primary genre. And then people will figure out the other elements from the content or the cover or the synopsis, but to really focus on the primary genre. And then the other thing is, once that is established, you can have, if you're marketing on your own or your publisher is marketing for you, you can have different ad campaigns, right? So it's like, if your book is science fiction and mystery, you can have two totally different ad campaigns, one for science fiction targeting and one for mystery targeting. If you look at literary, you both brought up literary genre bending as well. So if you look at books like Anthony Doerr's Cloud Cuckoo Land or David Mitchell's Cloud Atlas, both with the word cloud in it, that was not intentional. But those books really, they run the gamut in terms of genre. They have history, they have science fiction, they have action, they have love stories in them, and they're also both runaway bestsellers. And where though are they placed in bookstores? How are they marketed? I don't know off the top of my head, but my guess is that both of them are actually in the literary section, and the primary market is the literary market. But both of them span from something like 1500 to Cloud Cuckoo Land goes to maybe I think like 2200 or something like that, and Cloud Atlas goes I think to like 2500. Right, they
Oh.
span a
Hmm.
very very wide time span, with timelines in the middle of it as well. And then besides the timing, as you pointed out, Jayne, also the settings. Cloud Atlas is all over the world. So is Cloud Cuckoo Land. They also have casts of probably dozens of characters. But at the end of the day, my guess is that they are on the literary fiction shelves, right? So it's like that's the primary target audience and the primary target market. And then people will figure out, from reading it, from reading the back cover, what it's about. And if there's somebody, if it's a person who loves literary fiction, but they can't stand anything that happens to take place in the future, they're not going to read it.
Yeah, I think you're right. And so the advice, Mike, do you have any advice for people who are trying?
Yeah, I do, and it's a little bit different, but I think compatible with what Rob said. You gotta. I think first of all, why am I writing this story? What's the story that I want to write, and why do I want to write it? And with my military series, I really didn't want to do a Tom Clancy uh, novel. I wanted to shine the spotlight on women who are, in my experience, true heroes. This was based on my experience as a Navy physician. I got to know some really fantastic women, and I will tell you that uh, whatever they achieved, they had to work twice as hard as the men to get there. That was just the reality of the setting when I was in there. So that was that was the thrust of why I wanted to write this. And there were other things as well, but that was the main thing. So what's the story you're writing, and why are you writing it, and who's the audience? Well, if you're going to write a story that's primarily about women, probably that's your audience, uh, primarily. And we know that 65% of readers across the board are women. So where I think I messed up was I had this notion that I was going to appeal to this segment of readers who would appreciate these stories. And then I went and did Clancy-esque kind of marketing with images of battleships and well, you can see the covers are even a little, and so those were bought by men who went, yeah, that's a stupid story. Where's so I learned a lot from that experience. It's what's the story you're writing? Why are you writing it? Who is the real intended audience that you want to reach? And how do you get them to understand that that book is out there and they might actually enjoy it? So.
Well, I had an interesting experience. I've always loved to work with a psychic twist, but I have no interest in the supernatural. So I don't write paranormal in the sense that most readers understand paranormal. There's no vampires, there's no witches, there's no ghosts. I can read those, but I just don't write them. I write the psychic thing. And I'm very comfortable with that. And my readers are too. And that was actually sort of a surprise, because my publisher was very nervous about the psychic element because in their minds, it was going to mess up with the paranormal. And they didn't want my books to become paranormal books. But the audience interpreted it their own way. They had no trouble with the psychic thing, even those who don't read paranormal. They were perfectly happy with the psychic thing. So it's confusing because we can't always predict how the audience is going to react to the injection of something into the genre that they weren't expecting. The easiest way to do that, I think, in terms of advice for writers is pick a genre that's already got an edge to it. Like, for example, want to write a little horror, and horror light is its own thing these days, as opposed to Stephen King type horror. Horror light fits very well into the Gothic, the classic Gothic novel, which always had that sort of atmosphere of dread and the empty house on the cliff and what did I see? And there's an element of madness involved. Can I believe my own eyes? What am I going crazy? That's a classic Gothic setup. So it works whether or not you have a rational explanation for the ghost or whether it actually was a ghost. That genre can take it that far, which I think came as a surprise to a lot of people, but it works. But you put a ghost into a classic murder mystery or a vampire into a classic murder mystery, and you got a whole other problem. So at the edges, they're all fluid, but you better have a gut sense of what you're writing toward.
Yeah. Well, Jayne, I think one of the things that I think stands out in your novels is you do kind of go there, but you're so close to reality as you write the psychic parts that it's totally believable. It's totally believable, and I mean that's a masterful piece of work to be able to do that. But I can understand why people resonate with it because it's still grounded in real life.
And there's not, I don't have to go to the supernatural to explain it.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Whereas Rob, in his series, went for really a conspiracy thriller. So in that sense, it fits perfectly as under the category of thriller, which is a pretty broad category these days. The conspiracy thing, but you introduce an element of the paranormal, supernatural, whatever you want to call it, and you pulled it off. I think because you related it to the classic painting and the historical side of Venice, and it worked. It's hard to explain. Where it would have been easy to really screw that up, but you made it work when you were and this was a 3-book series, I might add. It was a trilogy, which is a long way ahead to plot. It's called what the
Painted Souls series.
The Painted Souls series. Yeah, you can find it under that. So when you set out to write those 3 books and you could see that long stream of story ahead of you, how did you make your decisions about how to end it in each book, and what elements would be supernatural and what elements would be human, sort of emotional?
Well, first of all, thank you for the compliments, Jayne, coming from you. That's pretty amazing. And, I just wanted to say about your books, as Mike pointed out, like the Lost Night Files, which are fantastic, everybody. People should read those books because they're really, really amazing. You grounded everything in reality. And I feel like that's why when people are reading it, even if you don't necessarily believe in any of this type of stuff, like it comes across as believable, right? And that's what's important. You obviously know that you're reading a book. And I think that that's really important, that you ground it in reality, which is actually something that I really strive to do in mine as well. And there's not that much supernatural stuff that happens in my books. And once you come to terms that everything is grounded in reality, it's like I made, I that was very important to me to make it believable from that context. So when certain things happen that are on the supernatural side, it becomes believable. And in answer to your question, so the first book actually, the original intention was to write it as a standalone. In fact, I'm also a screenwriter. And the first book I adapted from a screenplay that I wrote years ago, that was actually optioned by a production company founded by DreamWorks execs. It was never made into a movie, um, unfortunately, but when the rights reverted back to me, I decided to adapt it into a book. And then during that process, it organically evolved into so much more that it just had to become a trilogy. So the first book you can read it as a standalone if you want, but there's some open threads. And then
Mhm.
the second book definitely ends with, a cliffhanger and some, an open-ended ending. And then the third book really ties it all up. So in answer to your question, when I was writing it, I did have that intention. I knew from the first book that I wanted it to be a trilogy, but I also wanted people to be able to read the first book as a standalone if they wanted to. And then the second and third books, I actually outlined concurrently. I'm a very, very big
Yeah.
outliner, and I outlined two books together, so I knew exactly where I was going to go.
Wow.
And I intentionally left the second book as a cliffhanger. And then with the third book, definitely tied it all up with a nice little bow.
Mike,
You know,
what I was going to
go
ask,
ahead.
well, I was going to ask you to describe what, away from where you were talking about the women military books.
Yeah.
In a sense, your Dr. Zach Winston series
Yeah.
also incorporates it's a bit of a genre bending book
Yeah.
itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you approach that? Because in a way that fits more easily into everybody's idea of what an ER room mystery is supposed to look like. I
Yeah.
mean,
So,
you hit those conventions.
um, yeah, I was going to follow up,
Sure.
and you introduced it very well. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good, I guess. Uh, I don't always plan these things, but my first military book, Dead Already, medical book, Dead Already, uh, is a book about an emergency physician who loses a patient, gets sued for malpractice, meets this lawyer with whom he develops some sort of relationship that they still haven't figured out by the third book, Death Agent. But as I was writing it, and there was the all the medical stuff was there, and there was a bunch of medical legal stuff. And I was thinking, this thing is just a little flat. It's a little two-dimensional. So I got this, Lord only knows where this came from out of my brain. I got this idea that my main character, Dr. Zach Winston, should have something in his past that is driving his actions in the present. And that's something that happened in the past, was the horrific, terrifying death of his brand new wife, who was a naval aviator and sustained I don't want to give away the whole plot, but sustained a aviation mishap and did not survive. So that experience of losing somebody who was really the love of his life in such a terrible way, uh, in the time frame of the novel, she comes back, but she's not a ghost. Sometimes early on you think, what is she a ghost? I mean, how, but it's his subconscious uh, creating a presence that grounds him in the drama and the trauma and the very personal professional crises that he's in, uh, because deep down inside he is that uh, person who can solve these problems and do good. And so Noelle, who was his late wife, shows up several times in the novel. And interesting, just yesterday, somebody who read that book mentioned that to me, that they thought that was a great trick or whatever
Yeah.
they called it. So that's a long-winded way of saying sometimes you don't plan things. If you just kind of let your characters develop, sometimes they'll tell you what they need to round them out and to round out the story.
Rob, you said you are also a screenwriter. How does that, when you set out to write a film script, how is that different when you're thinking of genres? How do you think differently about film, a script?
That's a great question, Jane. And
Because
you know, it's
films do have genres. We do.
they do have genres. It's not nearly what I should say is sticking to a specific genre isn't nearly as important as it is with
Ah,
books. I guess primarily because gone are the days of Blockbuster and video stores where you don't have to worry about shelving it. I don't know if that was an issue back then, but I feel like things are more and more cross genre all the time. I really do. But even writing it, like it's never really come up. In fact, I actually just collaborated on a script with a friend of mine. Her name is Laura Kemp. In fact, we adapted her book into a screenplay format. Now, her book is cross genre, so it blends like romance and light horror. Not exactly gothic; it's more like Americana horror, and also some historical stuff and things like that. But when we created the script, actually all of those other cross genre elements really got amped up.
oh,
So the screenplay is actually much more blended genres than the book was, I think. And so it was just we just finished it and actually just sent it out to some people. So we'll see how it goes. But to be honest with you, I love your question because really, like, we didn't actually think about the concerns of blended genres as you might with books.
that's
So
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's there. I do think it's there, but really not quite as much. If anything, studios are more receptive to it. I think they might be open to trying something, on the new side with that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. What
You know,
what are you going to
Eh,
work on next, and how are you going to think about it going in, Mike? What are you writing now, and what are you thinking about in terms of how you're going to market?
Well, so Points of Attack is the third of four military fiction novels, and it's coming out next week, and then I'll finish up probably by the first of the year. The third does Dr. Zach Winston book, Death Agent. We may bring it out as early as August, certainly no later than September. There will probably be a fourth book. However, I typical emergency physician. I don't like to do the same thing over and over again. So I'm trying to think of a series or at least a novel that will blend uh, my background as a physician and an early background as a seminarian Catholic wannabe priest. Um, and Jane, you'll have to remind me the name of the author that we read.
I
That
can't even pronounce her name, but I know the name of the mystery. Yeah, it's
yeah, the book is
the Sister Holiday Mysteries.
Sister Holiday series, and Sister Holiday is a former dancer, drug addict, real hardcore sort of person who got out of that and became a nun, and now she's solving crimes in New Orleans. And she's really an endearing character. So I'm wondering, well, gee, would there be a possibility for a physician slash priest who's sort of leading a dual life or something? So anyway, that's what I'm
Yeah, look at
and
it.
and ask me what genre that's going to be in. I have no idea. None.
I think what you're talking about there is providing that moral compass to the stories,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
successful genre writing has to have a moral compass. Um,
yeah.
I'm not sure that's always true in literary fiction. Um,
True.
because it kind of has different tasks, a different
Yep.
job, I think. But if you're writing genre or blended genres, I think you do need to be aware of that moral compass. Yeah. So what are you working on, Rob?
Yeah, so well, I obviously love blended genres. It really is where my brain gravitates towards. I love reading stuff that takes in elements from different genres. I love watching that type of material as well. So ultimately, what I want to do is write a series of historical thrillers where they are going to be international kind of adventure thriller stories that also include historical fiction. Now, this is a genre already. I'm not going to be recreating anything new. Think about something like an up-leveled National Treasure, something like that, which I love anyway. But what I've decided to do in order to really bring in the right target audiences into that is first create other books in one of those genres, different genres, and then sort of combine it. So what I'm working on right now is the first book of a new series that's a spy thriller series. So think of like kind of a Jack Ryan or Jason Bourne, and that's really kind of straight spy thriller.
Mhm.
Then I'm also working on a spin-off, the second part of a spin-off of my Painted Soul series. That's 100% historical thriller. I mean, historical fiction, excuse me. And then I'm also going to write another historical fiction book too. So I'm going to basically have these present day spy thrillers and historical fiction books that are all really stuck in those particular genres. And then I'm going to come out with the blended genres later on.
What's
I
the
don't know if
what's the appeal of writing historical fiction? What's the appeal of the historical for you in terms?
Oh, I'm fascinated by history. I think there are so many stories from history, and that's why I love it when things take history and then they're applied to the present day. But there are just so many stories from history. I love going deep into the past. You have these fascinating characters who very often what they did has reverberated through time to what's going on now and potentially even in the future. I love historical mysteries, for example, especially unsolved historical mysteries. That's actually what really kind of where I'm going to go with
Jack the
that.
Ripper kind of.
Yeah, or more, even older than that, actually. Kind of like ancient unsolved
Oh yeah,
mysteries,
yeah.
that kind of thing. Especially if it's a mystery that people still kind of gravitate towards. There was actually an article on CNN today that I was reading about an hour ago about Easter Island. People are still trying to figure out how all these gigantic head sculptures got on this island and then what happened to the people themselves, that kind of thing. I mean, they know how, it's not like the sculptures got there. Let me rephrase that, but like how they actually built them and made them, things like Stonehenge, that kind of stuff. But all sorts, like it doesn't have to be that ancient. I'm really fascinated across the board. I mean, Jack the Ripper, I think is fascinating, but like anything that kind of predates modern technology,
Yeah, I
I'm
hear
just
you.
fascinated. Um,
Escape the cell phones.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's no record of it, right? It's like, I feel bad for people 100 years from now where they're not really going to be able to write historical fiction from 2024
No
because
mysteries.
there are a billion photos and videos of every single thing that everyone's done, and
Yeah.
there's no more
Mm.
mystery. And you imagine the criminal investigative technology that's already out and going to be out
Yeah.
very soon.
Mm.
Like crime scene investigators is going to be snap, like AI is going to be like, oh, John Doe committed the crime.
Yeah.
It's got to be him. Well, I like
So,
that brings up my question for you then, because military is setting aside, which has you really are constrained by a lot of real world realities when you're writing about the military in the
mhm.
way that you chose to do it, which is a realistic look at life in those ships. But when you go to the ER room, you have I read you in a different way. There's more of a sense of mystery there um, because illness and disease and the things you see in the ER are not always easily solvable and instantly solvable mysteries. Um, so when you think about, do you feel a different kind of constraint when you write the military as opposed to, do you feel freer when you're writing the ER or more?
I think that's a fair statement. I do, and part of the constraint about writing the military fiction series, which will end with the fourth book, the one following Points of Attack, is that I've been out of the Navy long enough and I've been out of the operational setting long enough that I can no longer write about it credibly. Although it's fascinating to me how some of the things that are currently very much in the news, particularly as it relates to the Western Pacific,
Yeah.
are things that we were looking at 10, 12 years ago. The rise of the Chinese Navy being one, for instance. But I'm done with that. The thing about the ER series is it's always going to be some challenge, and it's really about going into work not having the slightest idea what you're going to see or what kind of challenges you're going to have or what kind of life and death situation you're going to be thrown into, and having just some sort of fundamental confidence that, well, I can deal with this, and then you do, and then you get back into the real world, and sometimes the concerns of the real world just seem so inconsequential based on what you've just been through. And so part of that experience resonates, I think, which really my books are more about the characters, although the action is certainly part of it. And what I like about the what I call mine is the medical conspiracy thriller is because I'm still learning about how many different ways there are to kill people and make it look like illness or an accident. And so those are sort of the bases of some of the things I do. And the finally thing, the all of my medical books also have a legal aspect to them. I'm fascinated by the whole not only just the legal issues in terms of defending against malpractice and that sort of thing, but also what it takes to create there's a slip of the tongue, gather the right evidence to bring somebody to justice and not do it wrong. So yeah, so I think I'm going to be writing a lot of that medical stuff from here on out, and it's always going to have something to do with mystery and thriller and conspiracy.
Those
Because
sound
that
great.
raises the stakes. Makes
And
the
Jane, what are
stakes.
you working on? I'm sure the
Oh,
audience would love to hear that.
well, thanks for asking. I'm actually writing. I've been writing in trilogies lately. Probably learned that from you.
Yeah.
So I can plot that far, but that's about it, So I'm winding up another psychological or paranormal psychic suspense is what I call them, story. And then I'm going to be in that situation we all face with the end of a series. So what do I want to do next? Where do I want to go next? So I'm kind of looking for, it's scary, to think about that. What do I really want to write next? But at the same time, I also know the conventions and the genres I'm drawn to, and the kind of story I tell probably won't change much. It'll probably be more a matter of landscape, setting, background. Yeah.
So
But
I was
hope you-
actually going to ask, where is Amanda Quick going?
yeah, that's she's off. She's just sitting on the sidelines right now. I don't know. Rob, my Amanda Quick name is, I write historicals. That's my
I know,
history.
like set in like the 20s, right?
Yeah, the last set was, I've done it in the 19th century and then I've done it in the 1930s. So I might I don't know. Like I said, I'm at that point where I get to decide. Make
No,
commitments.
two things, Jane. One is I do hope you continue the Lost Night Files because they are absolutely fantastic.
Oh,
Love
thanks.
them.
Thanks.
And two, this just popped into my head when you brought up Amanda Quick sitting on the sidelines. Have you ever thought about doing a blended genre book that is co-written by more than one of your personas? So like, such and such book written by Jane Castle and Amanda Quick.
Well, I've actually done that. I'm not
Really? You
co-writing.
put both names on the book?
No, not co-writing in that sense, but like it's a trilogy, and the first book of the trilogy is set in the 19th century, and the second book of the trilogy is
Yeah,
set in the 21st century, and then the third trilogy is set on my futuristic world.
Oh,
I
and you
read
did
that. I
all three
read that
authors?
trilogy. Yes.
So the mystery goes through
Yeah.
three levels. So and that was fun. But another warning, a lot of people won't follow me into all three worlds because they don't read futuristics, or they don't read historicals, or they don't read contemporaries. And so that was actually a good example of me shooting myself in the foot yet again. But it was
I thought it
fun.
was great.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Other writers, I think, are more intrigued by it than readers were.
Yeah,
It's-
probably.
Maybe.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
And by the way, we were talking about advice for aspiring authors. A lot of what I think all three of us were saying really was kind of geared around towards publishing or even post-published books. But for those writers who you haven't actually published yet, and maybe you might go out on you're querying or that type of thing, I think the advice actually holds true for that as well. If you're sending out query letters to agents, really focus on the primary genre, even if it's blended genres. Focus on the main genre of your work, sprinkle in those other elements, and the agents will naturally pick that up. Because when they're reading those query letters, they have it in their head like, okay, how am I going to sell this? Who am I going to send this to? What
Yeah.
publishers am I going to send this to?
Yeah.
So they're going to need to know that. So it all starts from there. So it's the same kind of thing.
If they learn to think about genres, I think you're absolutely right. My editor always says the first thing every editor is going to ask is, where do I sell it?
Hmm.
And that's what the agents are asking.
Mhm.
So definitely. Well, before we wind up, I have one question which I asked last time, and now you've all had plenty of time to think about another answer. We talk about how we do this. I'm back to my original question. I love this question, is why are we doing it? What do we get out of this? So who wants to take that one first?
Like,
It's cheaper than psychotherapy.
Okay, that's a good one. There is something very personal
Yes, absolutely.
about
It's a
writing.
way, it's a way to get in touch with your subconscious and put it out there. I think we all write primarily for ourselves.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
Ron?
well, honestly, for me, it's the opposite. I can't not do it. I just love, I think I'm a natural storyteller. I'd classify myself as a storyteller before a writer. And I love stories in general. I love being told stories
Yeah.
as much as I love telling stories. I just love making them up and sharing stories. And sharing them with the world. It's like, it's difficult as much as I think certain people might want me to stop, namely my wife. Not sure if she's watching this, simply because of the time that
Yeah.
it takes.
Yeah.
It's like I do understand, because it's difficult having a spouse who is completely in their own head for so much, and oftentimes in front of a computer, and just being like, it's a very solitary profession.
Mm.
And I think for all of us writers, if we're not sitting in front of a computer, much of the day, like, I'm just in my own head. And I think that that's very difficult for a spouse. But it's something it would be impossible for me to stop. Like, it's just a part of who I am. I just love stories and I love telling them.
Well, I'm the same way, and you are too, Mike, because I remember asking you once if you were just going to stop, and you said you couldn't.
I can't.
Yeah.
I
I
can't
think,
stop.
see,
And I was going to ask you, Jayne, you've been doing
Thank-
this for decades now, and
yeah,
and you're
everybody,
still writing, and
yeah. I can't tell you how many times people will say, "Are you still writing?"
yeah, I mean,
Yeah, are you
you
still?
could have you could have quit
Yeah,
any time, but you're
and
still
then
doing it.
and do what? I don't think we're actually that different from the generation before us. I think the difference is we're published. When I look back at how everybody kept a journal, in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, if you could read and write, you had a journal. You wrote letters. You just got it all out on the page one way or another. And I think that's just something people do. A lot of
Mhm.
people do.
Yeah, even if it's writing letters, writing books, or sitting around a campfire
Yeah,
telling stories,
telling
I
stories.
think it's
Yeah,
part of the human experience.
I
It
think
is.
Yeah.
probably what makes us different in from everything else. Just that's probably, oh, don't go there, but all right, before we wind up, one more time around the room, I want to see a copy of the book and tell us again about the series that you're writing that is genre blended. Rob, hold up the
Sure.
book.
This is the first book, The Prisoner of Paradise, followed by Painter of the Damned, followed by Master of the Abyss. They're all called the Painted Soul series. And so, yes, they are blended genres, historical thrillers blended with historical fiction, a little bit of magical realism, and even a little bit of romance about an American couple who travel to Venice, Italy. And the husband comes to believe that his true soulmate is not his wife, but a woman whose soul has been imprisoned in the world's largest oil painting for 450 years. And then he goes on a quest to learn more and freer. It becomes this kind of big conspiracy thriller, as you mentioned, Jayne. He also has past life regressions back to the 1500s. And so that's all out now. I am working on a spin-off to that, and then also a spy thriller as well, and then ultimately a whole new series too.
Thanks. I'll look forward to them. I love that Painted Soul series. It's
Yeah.
a great conspiracy thriller.
Thank you very
Mike?
much.
Well, I actually have two series going, as you've probably figured out by now. The Dead Already, Warm and Dead, Death Agent are the first three books of a planned four-book series or more. That's called the Dr. Zach Winston Medical Conspiracy Thriller Series. The protagonist is an emergency physician, former Navy doc, Dr. Zach Winston, who just he's a good guy and he's a great ER doc, and he's slowly growing up, and he's getting a lot of help from the woman who represented him in his first malpractice uh, action, an attorney by the name of Bridget Larson, who's also a main character in each of the three books. Their relationship is multidimensional. And I'll just leave it at that. The third book, Death Agent, goes deeper into the underlying conspiracy that has been the thread throughout the three books, and we begin to learn that it's actually international in nature. And more about that I shall not say. Uh, the military fiction series, as I mentioned before, actually has two main characters. The first is uh, approximately 45-year-old senior Navy captain. Uh, uh, Scarlet's her call sign, Kate Mahoney, who's a Navy jet aviator, one of the best, and faces challenges both on the professional side from a society from a milieu that is male dominated and aggressively so, and she has to deal with that as well as the vagaries of being a single parent of a teenager with a psychopathic ex-husband who keeps making life more difficult for her. And the other main character is a young woman, Lieutenant Commander Jessica Cricket Squire, who is lesbian and has suffered through the homophobia that used to exist and is coming into her own. And she's had some significant issues as well because she got captured in the last book and finds herself in North Korea under not real good circumstances. So Points of Attack, that's coming out next week, features both of these women as they meet their separate and combined challenges.
And
Angels
looking
Falling
forward
is a
to it.
standalone psychological suspense thriller.
And I am going to be looking at the next one of these.
Awesome.
This is
Right.
my People in Glass Houses, which is the latest in my biggest genre bending book, which is the futuristic romantic suspense with dust bunnies.
Oh, I love dust bunnies.
And on that note, I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you both so much for this conversation. I think a lot of
Yeah.
people are going to find it illuminating and also, if they're writing, useful. So
Yeah.
you
Well,
both.
thank you, Jane. Thank you, Mike. I'm very excited for both of your books that are coming out. Can't wait to read them.
Thanks.
Love that cover, by the way, Jane.
I think pink has
I
become
might.
the new thriller look for some reason. I'm not sure why, but there's just a lot of
I
shocking.
mean,
Yeah.
screams thriller to me. Yeah, it looks great. Yeah. So
So yeah, thank you, Jane, thank
Oh.
you for doing this, for hosting us, and
My
thanks
pleasure.
for thanks for taking a fledgling writer under your wing, what, 12 years ago now? When we met at a family reunion in Arizona, and I mentioned that I was trying to write a book, and you've been a great friend and mentor ever since.
Oh, thanks.
So I
Well,
appreciate that.
you both are very fine writers, and I wish you all the best with the publication
Yeah.
of this book. So
thank you
thanks.
so
Yeah,
much.
Rob,
Thanks again.
onward and upward.
Have a
Keep them coming.
have a
Keep
great
them coming.
summer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks
Good
to
to
both of
see
you.
you.
Take care.
All
Bye-bye.
right.